NATO, as I read, was created basically when the Soviet Union was really a threat to Western Europe as well as the United States. Yep. The Soviet Union is no more. Why does NATO exist today?
You know, David, those were questions asked in the early 90s, and they were saying, what's the future? The term at that time was out of sector or out of business. And I think there are two periods in which NATO still demonstrated its viability. 1996, when it went away from Central Europe and conducted the peacekeeping operations in both Bosnia and then Kosovo. And then in 2006, where it made the decision not only to leave Europe for peacekeeping missions, but to the Near East for combat operations inside of Afghanistan. So as many would say, this is not your father's NATO. This is an operation, this is an organization that can operate pretty much around the world.
But has the mission of the United States changed, at least under this president? Because we're not involved in so many of those operations around the world anymore.
We're not, but we are still in Syria. We are still in Iraq. NATO just recently put a NATO training mission back into Iraq. We're still in Afghanistan. Look, I think we recognize that we will go nowhere without allies, and there's no better security organization to work alongside with our allies than NATO itself.
So let's talk about the difficult one that President Trump has talked about a lot, and that is, how do we pay for it? Or maybe more importantly, who pays for it? Because we can put up a chart that shows that really the overwhelming amount, something like 67, 68% of total NATO expenses comes to the United States. And some very big countries, such as Germany, don't really contribute as much as one would think. Is the president right?
Well, the president is right. In many ways, some of the countries in NATO are security free riders. They're allowed to have pretty nice social welfare states and defense budgets of 1 or 2%. The United States defense budget is 3 to 4%. So I think that's what was behind President Trump's push to get more NATO funding, as every president has since 1949.
Well, in fact, as I understand it, President Obama actually got an agreement, he thought, with everyone to get up to, I think, 2% was the magic number. Yep. It's taking some time. Are they dragging their feet?
They're certainly not dragging their feet. They have competing demands. And when you have the United States, clearly the world's greatest military power, inside your country, those countries are able to say, well, maybe we don't need to spend as much on defense if the Americans are going to do it for us.
Well, and to what extent is there just plain old complacency setting in? Because as you look at the countries that do tend to increase their contributions and are getting it up there, they tend to be closer to Russia.
No, that's certainly true. There is nothing that is a greater incentive to increasing your defense budget than to have an enemy on your borders. But I don't want to take anything away from the Central European powers. We are operating with them side by side in places such as Afghanistan and Iraq, and in some cases Syria. So while we would certainly like to see more from our alliance partners, we can't neglect the fact that they are providing some.
Staying with NATO, and a particular partner in NATO is Turkey, with whom we're having some pull and tug, I think it's fair to say. The F-35, the fighter plane that they were supposed to be purchasing from us, got put on hold. Now, the U.S. Defense Department said they may work through that, but it appears to be an issue about Turkey really getting Russian missile defense. How important is it to the United States that Turkey not essentially get their material and their weapons from Russia?
Look, on the specific issue of the S-400s and the F-35, we certainly don't want to sell an aircraft to them that they can use the Russian S-400 to determine its weaknesses and its strengths. But I think we've got to look at the larger issue that we have with Turkey, and Turkey has with the United States. Obviously, we have some challenges with keeping Gulen here. We have some concerns and differences on the issue of Syria. And we have those differences on a military level. So I think we ought to look at the S-400 issue in the larger context of the U.S.-Turkish relationship. They are a valuable NATO ally. They're the largest land force inside the NATO alliance other than the United States. and I'd rather have them inside of NATO than looking elsewhere for an alliance.
Yeah, Gulen being, as I understand it, the sheikh who lives in Pennsylvania that President Erdogan believes is trying to overthrow him. Turn the globe here and let's go around to China, because we have issues over in China as well. China building up its military, as we know. South China Sea, a lot of issues there. Now we're selling F-16s to Taiwan that China appears not to like very much. How important is it that we continue to support Taiwan as a counterpoint to China militarily?
Well, again, it's part of this overall relationship we have with China. They have an ancient game called Go, far more complicated than chess, and in many ways, the United States and China are playing Go right now. We're trying to get them to come to a trade agreement. We're trying to create incentives by arming their enemies, such as Taiwan, which they consider to be part of China. So I think it's just part of a larger game. Clearly, the F-16s aren't going to stop the Chinese military, but it is a clear sign that the Americans are in Taiwan to stay for the near future, and we've got a lot of issues that we need to work with on China regarding trade, regarding cybersecurity, regarding trade theft, and the military issues as well. So I would look at this as a smaller part of a larger game of Go.
So finally, let's talk a bit about our southern border, because as you know, the president declared an emergency and said he would take funds to build a wall, even though Congress had said you can't have at least funds to that level. And he's going to take some of it out of military appropriations. We heard from the acting Secretary of Defense last week, who expressed some concerns about that, although he said he was comply with the orders of his commander-in-chief. Listen to what he said.
We said, here are the risks, longer term to the department, and those risks were weighed. And then, given a legal order from the commander-in-chief, we are executing on that order. And I've been deliberately working to be transparent in this process, fully knowing that there is downsides, which will hamper us.
So you know so well, Mark, that when the military appears before Congress, they have a difficult role because they answer the commander-in-chief. At the same time, they've always said we have to give our honest responses to the Congress. That was pretty honest and came pretty close to saying it wasn't my idea, but I did what I had to be told. How big a risk is it to divert those funds away from other purposes in order to build that wall?
Well, I think in the short term, there's not going to be a significant risk. I mean, the military is a can-do organization. It will figure its way around in the short term to maintain its readiness, maintain its operational capabilities. But if this continues to drain the defense budget, or if Congress starts to drain the defense budget, it will have an impact on readiness. It will have an impact on current operations overseas. It will have an impact on personnel costs. So in the near term, I don't think there's a tremendous risk to readiness, at least this year. But in the long term, it could have, particularly as we're trying to grow back out of the weak defense budgets that we've had over the last 10 years.